Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Mortal Kombat. So what Mortal Kombat is essentially about is basically we center on the character of Cole Yun, and he is this retired MMA fighter of sorts, and one day he's recruited by this character Jax, who tells him that this mark that's been on his arm all this time that he thought was a birthmark is actually a dragon tattoo, which basically means that he has been chosen to partake with this long line of other people in this tournament known as Mortal Kombat. And basically, you know, there's a bunch of different tournaments that are going on, but there also is this character, Shang Tsung, and this guy, you know, he's very much behind the Outer Worlds, and he is trying to prevent this tournament from ever potentially happening and just killing off people willy-nilly. So basically they need to do what they can to make sure that this doesn't happen and protect Earth and everyone involved, and just make sure that everything goes the way that it should. So Mortal Kombat overall, I was definitely looking forward to this film, which I was not expecting to say. You know, when it comes to video game films, they are not normally good. They don't normally have a very good track record at all. You know, they're one of those kinds of properties where normally when you have a video game film, it just is very much a red flag in that way, and these days especially, I'm very uncertain that we're even going to have a decent one, so I just wasn't really expecting much from this film. But then the trailer came out and it actually looked really good. It seemed like they were doing a good job of actually making a Mortal Kombat film that was as brutal and bloody as I have heard. Now, obviously, I'm not a gamer. I don't know a lot about Mortal Kombat as a property. My knowledge of Mortal Kombat is that I have a lot of friends that have played it and they've had fun with it for sure. But aside from that, I didn't really know too much about it. I did get a chance to watch both of the movies that have preceded this one, and they're really not that great. The first one is very 90s. It's very over the top and cheesy, and it does feel very like Hollywoodized in that way, but it's overall like a fun watch, but it really isn't anything that I'd recommend. And then Annihilation is just one of the most confounding and just disastrous blockbusters I think ever made. So saying that this one was going to be better than that isn't really saying a lot. And so after watching this film, I can definitely say that this is for sure the best Mortal Kombat film, but that doesn't really mean it's that great either. Mortal Kombat's a film that has a lot of good elements. It has a lot of potential, but at least for me, I don't think it fully came together in the way that they really wanted it to. And we're just getting into right now. So the one thing to really talk about in this film when it comes to the acting side of things, there really is not. So getting into the acting with this film, there's not a lot to say, definitely. This is not really a film that's about the acting. I understand that, and I don't really have a ton to say in terms of the majority of these actors. What I will say is that most of them do a pretty good job. The highlight for me for sure, and the person that I thought was pretty much the big standout throughout this movie was Josh Lawson, who plays the character of Kano. I thought he was great. He definitely knows what kind of movie he's in. He's very sardonic and like cynical, and he's just really fun to watch as a character. And like I said, Lawson is just so into this role. You can't help but just love every second of what he's really doing. So I found him to be the character that I enjoyed the most in terms of the acting, and I think he definitely stood out the most to me. I think all the other actors here, they're fine for what they have, whether it's Jessica McNamee, who plays Sonya, or Mehcad Brooks, who's playing Jax. He's doing a pretty good job at that. I really loved Hiroyuki Sanada, who's playing Scorpion. He is really good in this movie. He's not in it a lot, but when he's here, he is really great, and he does a really great job. Same with Joe Taslim, who plays Sub-Zero. He gives a really strong performance for sure. Pretty much everyone here is good, and then there's Louis Tan, who plays our main character of Cole, and unfortunately, I have seen him appear in some other films, but here, he's just very flat. I wouldn't say that he's terrible in this role, but he's just very wooden. There isn't a lot of emotion that's given to him as a character. I have no doubt that he was having fun with this film, but I just don't really feel that he did all that much to really elevate this character for me, which I'll get more into the character in a little bit, but I just was not very impressed by him. I kept watching the movie hoping that he would get better, hoping that he would maybe win me over, and it just never really happened. I was not all that impressed with him. Again, in terms of acting, not a lot to say here. The movie is not overly concerned with acting, so I'm not really going to be either. Now let's get to the directing and the writing, because these are the aspects that honestly do kind of frustrate me when it comes to this film. Because Simon McQuoid as a director, I understand he's a first-time director. He doesn't have a lot of experience with making movies. He's mostly done like commercials and things like that. So I can understand that his directing here is not up to snuff with other directors. I totally understand that. My problem with his directing is that it just feels wildly uneven overall, because half of this movie is what you want. Because I've seen a lot of Mortal Kombat fans say, oh, this movie is everything you want, and for me, it's half of what you want. I think half of this film is really fun and crazy and doesn't take itself too seriously and just really goes for it in terms of the outrageousness of it all, and then the other half just seems a bit confused. There are points where this movie does not take itself too seriously, and it's really good when it's doing that, because it's recognizing that, like, this is kind of silly. This isn't really something that, you should put too much, you should have too much emotional stakes in, and that's fine. But there's another side of the movie that is trying to take itself seriously, and when it does, it doesn't do a great job with it. There are some scenes where it does work, but I just felt like overall, McQuoid just didn't fully know what he wanted this movie to be in terms of tone. It's a bit all over the place in terms of that. And so I think you can definitely get the sense that, like, McQuoid is a fan of Mortal Kombat. He's a fan of the property. But in terms of balancing a film, he just didn't really do a great job with it. I think there needed to be more of a balance between the seriousness and the silliness of this film. And it's just not really there. And so, again, the film just feels a bit uneven at points in terms of the tone. And so I think that's definitely one of the areas in which the film does kind of fall flat for me. But getting into the screenplay, this is really, we get into the things that don't really work for me. Because I will say, if you're coming to Mortal Kombat in terms of the fights, again, I'll get into that, but there is a lot of fights going on in this film, and I'll talk about how good they are, but the problem is that there needs to be a good story within this film when they're not fighting and things like that, and there just really isn't. It's not that this movie has a bad plot, it's that it doesn't really have a plot. The plot that I just told you, yes, it's the plot of the movie, but there just isn't really a lot going on in terms of story here, and I feel like there kind of should have been, because this is obviously a movie, and they just don't really dive deep into anything. The characters, especially here, are very one-note. We really don't know all that much about them. We don't understand what their real purpose is, why they care so much about this, aside from the fact that their lives are at stake. We don't really know all that much about them as characters. They feel a lot more at points like expositional mouthpieces. Like, you'll have Sonya, and she'll state something about who she is, or there you'll have Jax, and he'll state something about who he is, and I just needed more with these characters. And again, I'm not asking for, like, the most three-dimensional characters here. I just need more of a motivation, more of a backstory. And I feel like this film could have easily done that, and they just really didn't. And so I think that's one of the things that definitely did bring this film down a bit for me. I think, again, if you got to give me some character as well in order for me to fully stay invested in the movie, and it just really did not do that for me. So that's definitely one of the aspects in which I think the film did fall flat, but its biggest issue easily is who the film decides to focus on, because I'm not gonna lie, the first, 7 to 8 minutes of this movie, I was like, holy shit, this is actually going to be really good. There's a fantastic opening sequence, and not only is it a really badass fight scene, but it's really well told in terms of a story. It's generally very tragic what ends up happening. You're really invested in this character. You want to know more about where this character is going to go. But the problem is, that's not the main character we're focusing on. The film shifts focus, and we focus on this character of Cole. And I feel like audiences have kind of been a bit confused as to what the criticism is, because it's not the fact that Cole is included in the movie. I get it. He's supposed to be like the reactionary character. He's supposed to be like the audience where he's, you know, processing everything and getting a handle on how things work. The problem is more as a character, Cole has all the charisma. I already talked about how Louis Tan has all the charisma of a wet blanket. He's really not good here, very much at all. But Cole as a character is just so utterly lacking in this film. He's so boring. His arc is literally just, he's a retired MMA fighter. He's got a wife and kids, and he's going into this to benefit them, I guess. And that's kind of it. There's really not much to like about Cole as a character. So, and the fact that the film is so focused on him, that's one of the reasons why this film ultimately did not work for me, because I could not for the life of me care about anything that was going on with this character. And I feel like they could have easily done that. They could have found a way to dive maybe deeper into his MMA legacy. Maybe he had some sort of issue come up, and that's why he ended up retiring, and that's sort of haunting at him. And now him becoming this fighter for this tournament, you know, it's kind of reopening older wounds or something like that. That would have been cool if they dived into that, but there's no such arc in that way. They really don't do much with this character, and I feel like it was a complete waste overall. And especially, like, if you're going to invent a new character, that character needs to add something to the film. I didn't really feel like Cole added anything. In fact, everyone else that's you know, surrounding him is inherently more interesting. And I understand that, like, they're you know, original characters of Mortal Kombat, but this is a character that was specifically written for this movie, and I just don't think he contributes to anything in this film. He feels much more like he's just there to he's just there to observe, and he's just kind of there to watch, and he just doesn't really do much of anything. So I just found his character very boring. I had a very hard time investing in him overall, and every time they tried to focus on him and get me to care, it just really took me out of the movie. And so I don't really think they did a great job with him at all. The other issue I definitely do have of Mortal Kombat is that at points it really does feel like there is too much telling and not enough showing. And I've talked about this before, but it really does apply to this film, where they are explaining a lot of the prophecy. And it's not that they don't do that. They explain a lot of what's going on. They explain the history of Mortal Kombat. They explain how it's all started. They talk about the importance of everything. They talk about how these people were chosen. But the problem is they're doing it so quickly that I really don't have time to process any of this information. And so a lot of the things that they're talking about, I just don't really understand. I'm not a gamer in that way. I haven't played Mortal Kombat religiously like a lot of people that are going to see this movie. So I think a movie's job is to do a good job of catering to the fans, but then also cater to those that aren't as invested. And I don't think that this film really went the extra mile to do that. I think there was a way to definitely get more people on board with what's going on, but they just don't really do a great job with that. So I think it kind of failed in terms of storytelling for me. Like I said, there is a lot of exposition throughout this film, but more than enough of it feels less like it's here to get us to understand the importance of the tournament and things like that, and more just a rush to get us to that next fight scene. So again, it's another issue where they're putting a bit too much emphasis on those fight scenes. I understand that's what we want to see, and the film very much does deliver in that way, but I felt in terms of the story itself, I just didn't feel that invested by a lot of what was going on. The plot at points feels almost non-existent, and again, a lot of it is because the character we're following throughout this, Cole, there just really isn't a lot to him. You struggle to understand why the film is so focused around him, and when they eventually do start to dive a little bit deeper into the fighting, that's when the film really does succeed. But it does take a little while to get there, and so that is the one thing that very much did bring this film down for me. They need to put just as much emphasis on the story as they did on the fighting, and they just didn't really do that here. So I found that to be just a little bit disappointing overall. Again, a lot of these characters, really the only one I ended up liking was Kano. Kano was the one that I thought was a lot of fun, and there are a lot of fun moments in this movie. Like, he has a lot of great one-liners. He, again, again, just really doesn't give a shit about what's going on. He sees that everyone has powers and, like, he's waiting to get one. There's a lot of fun stuff there. He pretty much steals the entire movie for me. But aside from him, I just didn't really find myself attached to any of these characters. And the ones that I did, we didn't really get to see enough of. So the other characters in this movie, in the outer world, you really don't see a lot of them. Sub-Zero especially, he just doesn't feel like a huge threat throughout a lot of this. You understand that he's at play, but it doesn't really feel like he gets a lot of focus until really, I would say, the third act of this movie. That's when they really start to dive deeper into all of the things that he's doing. And I just think they needed to do more with him as a character. A lot of the villains in this movie, you just don't really feel their presence throughout. And that's the other thing. I think if we felt their presence throughout this movie, it would add a sense of tension. It would also add a sense of, it would add a sense of care to a lot of the action scenes and get you that much more invested in them, that I think it would overall make the movie that much better. So that is definitely the one thing that does bring this film down for me. And I just think in terms of a screenplay, it's not really there yet. I think there's a lot of things that they can do here, but as a screenplay, it just did not fully come together in the way that it should. So that's definitely the one aspect that really does fall flat in this film for me. Now, getting into the stuff that you do want me to talk about, the cinematography, oh my god, does this film deliver. I mean, they really do a great job when it comes to the fight scenes here. The biggest issue with the original Mortal Kombat films is that they feel so heavily sanitized and like they were done in such a way to, draw bigger crowds to the film, and the film had to be very Hollywoodized in that way. But this film is nothing like that. I mean, these characters are brutalized and battered, and you get to see the full bloody details, bloody and gory details of everything that they're doing in terms of the fighting, and it absolutely delivers in that way. There are so many sequences here that had me just absolutely aghast that they went to the places that they did. I couldn't believe just how far this movie was going in terms of violence, and it really does work. It never felt gratuitous in that way. There's one death especially, and it involves a turning of something. I'm not going to say much about it, but it involves a certain object and someone getting maybe rammed into someone going near said object, and holy shit, I could not believe that they actually showed that. I thought it was going to be something they maybe cut away from, but they didn't, and that's the one thing that I will absolutely say about this film. In terms of fighting, this film absolutely delivers, and they're always doing something different with it as well. It never feels like it's too much of the same thing. They're always, because all of these characters have different powers, all of these characters have different fighting skills, and so whenever there's fighting going on, you're completely glued to the screen, and I loved every single second of what they were doing in terms of fighting, and the CGI is not bad either. There's a lot of good shots in this film. There's a lot of things that I thought weren't going to work, and they really do. The locations, especially when they're in the outer world, it looks really good. It looks very tangible in that way. Like, I could definitely see, if this was a real thing, that being the outer world. It doesn't look phony in the slightest, and so it is a huge improvement over the original film, and I think they did a really good job with it overall. The climax especially really does deliver here. Even though you're not that invested in Cole's story, there's another thing that comes up, and it is just, it's awesome what they end up doing. It really does deliver in that way. And so if you're going to this film for the action scenes, you are not going to be disappointed. This film absolutely delivers on that front for sure. And then in terms of the score in this movie, I really enjoy what Benjamin Wallfisch did here. He does use the classic score that you're used to from the 90s, but he updates it a bit, and he puts his own like personal spin on it, and it just really does show how Wallfisch is truly one of the best composers working today. Every film that he's done lately, I've been so impressed by him, and this film is really no different. I loved what he ended up doing here. I think that he really did something great with this film. I think, again, he really put his own spin on it, and I think just in general, it's one of the best things about this film for sure. I really enjoyed the score here. It's very epic. It definitely ups the tension and just the fighting especially especially alongside to the music that he uses. It's great, and I really enjoyed his score throughout this film. And the editing. This film is only 2 hours long, and the one thing I will say is that it never dragged for me. I never found myself bored by Mortal Kombat. Even the scenes with Cole, I didn't feel that they were necessarily boring. I just felt they weighed the movie down a bit, and I think that was definitely the lower point of the film. Overall, Mortal Kombat, I do think definitely has a lot of potential for sure. I think in terms of fighting scenes, it absolutely delivers. It gives you what you want in terms of that. The film really does not hold back on that front. It has some decent performances. It's got some really memorable sequences in that way. But when it comes to the writing, it just feels a little bit flimsy. I think a rewrite definitely would have helped. But I will say, in terms of video game films, this is definitely one of the more promising entries that I've seen in a while. I can see this going somewhere. I really can. I see a path for this film. I see a narrative in which we're able to get more films from this franchise and they turn out legitimately good. I think there are just a couple things that they need to improve upon, and I think this film could turn out a lot better as a result. It really, again, is just they need to care just as much about the writing as they do about the fight scenes, and I don't think they're quite there yet, but I think if they do, I think this could legitimately turn into something really special. It's just not where I want it to, but I will say for what it is, Mortal Kombat is mostly entertaining. Mortal Kombat is a film that I think a lot of fans are going to enjoy. It's not a flawless victory, but it's not a complete fatality either. It's definitely a film that is better than a lot of video game films, but it's not quite where it needed to be. So overall, this is a very frustrating watch for me because I do think there are a lot of great ideas at play. The film is very fun. There's a lot of great fighting scenes here. There are some really fun performances. It's clear that there is passion in this movie. There is definitely a path for this to go, but the problem is the film itself just feels very confused between Simon McQuoid's direction, which is rapidly shifting from taking itself seriously to suddenly just being utterly ridiculous, to writing that is just very inconsistent, especially with a lead character that is so incredibly bland and disinteresting to follow. But then you also have a great score by Benjamin Wallfish, some stunning fight scenes. It just makes for a very, very frustrating watch overall that was far more inconsistent than I really wanted it to be. And that is why overall I can't say I did enjoy Mortal Kombat. So that is why I am ultimately going to give it a C+. For all of our guys in my review of Mortal Kombat, let me know if you guys saw this movie at all. I'd love your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.